All right, this is chapter 4 we're going to do today. Talk about tissues, a little bit about glands and membranes. We'll define what is a tissue, what are the 4 basic tissue types, talk a little bit about inflammation and tissue repair, and then say a little bit about cancer from a tissue standpoint. We'll go through some examples of tissues, and then I have a picture of Scarlett Johansson. I'm not attracted to her. She just has nice epithelial tissues, so I thought I'd show her. All right. So the 4 basic tissue types. There are epithelial tissues, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nerve tissue. So those are found in different places, kind of doing different things. Organs are made of tissues, and usually organs will have 2 or more tissue types. Just for fun there, I have a little picture of the Fantastic Four, which would be kind of like the 4 basic tissues, except they screw it up with the Silver Surfer. Yeah. But anyway, so anyway, um, the tissues. This is a big thing. We show tissues all the time in anatomy and physiology. We look and we see these things. Um, so this comes up over and over again. The tissues develop from different layers of the embryo. Um, Embryo forms from 3 layers, and so your book talks about this. This is not a big deal for us, but in some places you might run into this. The ectoderm is the outer layer of the embryo, and that will develop, the epithelial tissues will develop from that layer as well as the nerve tissues. Epithelium is like skin and body coverings and internal coverings and things like that. The mesoderm is the middle layer. That gives rise to mostly muscle and connective tissue, but also some epithelial tissue. And then the endoderm gives rise to lots of different epithelial tissues that are inside the body. So you'll notice here that muscle and connective tissues are restricted to mesoderm, and ectoderm is nerve tissue, but epithelial tissue comes from all over. It's a very common tissue, and there's lots of different types. So here's Jessica Alba. I am not attracted to her either, but she has very nice epithelium. Um, so epithelial tissues are tissues that are found on body surfaces and in glands. Your skin, the outer layer of your skin, is all epithelial tissue. The inside of your mouth and your intestine, those are internal surfaces. Those are all epithelial tissues, the surface layer. Um, the little uh, diagram here shows in pink a single layer of epithelial tissue that lines the inner lining of your lung. So it's in this case, a very thin layer of flat cells. Epithelial tissues have cells. They are entirely cells. They occur in layers. The layers are always adjacent to an external or an internal surface, so they have what's called a free surface. Um, then underneath them is a basement membrane that attaches them to the tissue underneath them, which is almost always connective tissue. These tissues protect surfaces, so that's one of their big things, but they also are very active in secretion. And so they secrete mucus, they secrete watery fluids, they secrete enzymes, they secrete hormones. They are very, very active in secretion. All glands, their active portions are epithelial tissues. And then in some places, they're specialized to absorb things, like in the intestine and in the lungs. Um, and so you find them in various different features. So here, this is a nice picture showing the pink epithelial tissue on the left-hand side of the drawing. And then on the right side, you have 2 electron micrographs. The one is the surface layer of a surface view. The upper one is the surface view of this lining, and the other one is a cross section with the free surface on top. And so it's 3 kind of views of the same thing. So glands are all epithelial tissues. I mentioned this, and glands are internal surfaces. There's always like a duct in there. And so there's different kinds of glands, tubules that are simple, that are unbranched. Sometimes they're compound, but there's different types of glands. They're all epithelial tissue. This is not a big deal for us, but in some cases you might wind up if you in an area where this is important. Glands can they can be work different ways. Sometimes they're secreting little bits. The cells are just releasing a fluid. Other times, whole chunks of cells or whole cells are shed. Um, we'll talk about these types of terms when we talk about the skin. All right. So epithelial tissues are named for the number of layers of cells they have. They can have more than one layer. Um, all the glands we see here are simple epithelium, where a single layer of cells. Um, and then they're named based on cell shape. Squamous are flat cells, cuboidal are cube-shaped cells, and columnar are tall cells. Those are the most important things to know. We'll see lots of these in the lab. All right, connective tissues are extremely different from epithelial tissues. They are generally have far fewer cells, and often the cells are not next to one another. What they have is material that the cells make, and it is between the cells. They have, it's called a fiber or a ground substance, and it can be a protein fiber, it can be a solid material, it can be a gel, or it can be a liquid. But that's what usually does the job. The cells maintain the matrix, and these things function to form structures, to store materials, to connect things, and to transport. These include tissues like bone and cartilage, fibrous connective tissues like tendons, loose fibrous connective tissue, but also things like blood, fat. Um, there's lots of different connective tissues. They can look extremely different, but what distinguishes them is this matrix material. And so often it's hard to find the cells. And so here the diagram shows different types of cells and different types of fibers. Um, very, very different. Um, most, and I should have said this, most epithelial tissues heal well. Connective tissues, some heal well, some don't. It's just what it is. And so here you can see fibers between cells in some of these places. Others you can see um, the matrix is actually within the cell sometimes. These upper two are fibers, loose fibrous and dense fibrous connective tissues. Sometimes the fibers are all in straight lines. Sometimes they're swirls. Um, they can be very, very different. All right, the next type of tissues are muscle tissues. In muscle tissues, there's fewer types of these. In all cases, the cells contract. They're loaded with proteins, actin and myosin. Those are what actually cause the cell to shorten. These cells shorten forcefully to produce movement. Are generally elongate cells that will get shorter and fatter. And as a byproduct, they produce heat. Muscle tissues uh, only grow at certain times during youth. When you're an adult, these tissues are hard to get to grow. They require lots of extra kind of growth signals. The three types of muscle tissues are skeletal muscle, heart muscle, and smooth muscle. We'll see all three of these in the lab. And so very, very active, a lot of energy use, but don't repair well. Generally, if the cells are injured or die, they're replaced by fibrous tissue, fibrous connective tissue. Then the third or the fourth type of tissue is nerve tissue. And our book makes it seem like there's just one type of nerve tissue, but later I'll introduce more. There are actually many, many types. They all are similar in that they contain neurons, cells that can transmit and send messages, and they can receive messages too. These are generally large, long-lived cells that may have these long extensions called axons and dendrites, and they may live your entire life. And some of these extensions might go 2 or 3 feet. Neurons are found in all nerve tissues, but what are different are a bunch of supporting cells called neuroglial cells. These are generally small cells that aren't involved in sending nerve transmissions, but helping. They help nerve tissues send messages. They support the cells. They hold them in place. They allow them to send messages faster. Nerve tissues are very active. They use lots of energy, but like muscle tissues, they generally heal poorly. The cells don't divide. And so talk about them. Okay, so uh, where do you see tissues? Well, tissues form organs, and the simplest organs are membranes. And it's just usually two tissue types, an epithelium that lines the surface, and then connective tissue underneath. Here we see a mucous membrane in this picture. Okay, and so there's this big white channel in the center. That's the free surface, and on either side, there's columnar epithelium. And some of these cells are producing mucus. They're goblet cells. And so like there's one kind of near the center, looks a little bit like a wine goblet, and what it's doing is belching out mucus. Membranes are just two layers of cells, or two tissues layers, often just one layer of epithelial cells and then some connective tissue underneath, which is often fibrous. And there's a bunch of different types of membranes. We have them in lots of different places. Okay, another topic that comes up in this chapter is inflammation. Happens whenever tissues are damaged. They release chemicals from inside the cell called mediators, and one of these is histamine. And these chemicals cause changes that bring a response. They increase blood flow and cause the blood vessels to leak out cell materials that will help repair the tissue, factors that cause clotting and things like that. And then they cause the migration of immune cells. These chemicals also cause pain and swelling and redness. And if there's an extensive amount of this will cause fever. So this guy behind his ear, that's a sign of inflammation, probably a mosquito bite or something like that. Another frequent change you see to tissues is cancer. I don't want to say frequent, but that sometimes happens. And these are cells that have had their DNA damaged so that it changes their behavior, particularly around mitosis. The cells no longer have the brakes for mitosis, and so they kind of do mitosis too often and they don't check for DNA damage. And so you get increasingly altered activity where the cells may not stay put, they get structural changes, and they stop doing their regular job. Um, Cancer cells often appear as a group of abnormal cells surrounded by normal cells. That's what causes a tumor. Okay, so tissues are groups of cells that have similar shapes and function. There are four basic types: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nerve tissues. Epithelial tissues line body surfaces and glands. They contain cells in layers, often identically appearing cells. Um, they're on body surfaces. Connective tissues contain a matrix between the cells, generally have fewer cells not in layers. The matrix can be fluid, protein, gels, fibers, or even a solid. Muscle tissues contract to produce movement. Nerve tissues produce signals, can send and receive signals that can alter cell activity. Tissue injuries cause inflammation, and uncontrolled cell division is a tissue type injury. Okay, we'll talk more about tissues on Wednesday.